I guess the playoffs brought that Canadian hockey out.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. And today's Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast is also brought to you by proflowers.com. Use the promo code LOFB to get yourself the 100 Blooms for Mum bouquet and free vase for just $19.99. My name is Josh Lloyd and you can find me on Twitter and on Instagram at redrock_bball, on Facebook at facebook.com/redrockbasketball, and you can support the show if you enjoy the show and you like what I'm doing over here. Head across to patreon.com/redrock_bball. Today's show, we're going to look back on Game 5 of the Wizards and Celtics series. We're going to preview Game 6 of that series as well. And on yesterday's podcast, I did a preview of Game 6 of Spurs Rockets. What I will do today is also give a quick rundown on that game under the assumption that Kawhi Leonard is out. Straight after recording yesterday, Kawhi came out and said, I'm playing. And then 12 hours later, the Spurs released the injury report that has Kawhi listed as questionable. Yesterday, I went through things mainly focusing on assuming that Leonard was playing. Today, what I'll do is just give a quick rundown on the players that get a significant bump if Kawhi is out. And then after looking at those two games, what I'll do is just go through the two games and just highlight a few guys who I think are real interesting players that need to be looked at for that slate. Just some more programming notes ahead. If the Spurs happen to win Game 6 against the Rockets, then obviously we won't have any more DFS contests for the rest of this second round because there'll only be one series left going. So tomorrow's podcast is up in the air at this point. If the Rockets win, there'll be a podcast. If the Spurs win, there probably won't be a podcast tomorrow, and then we'll get stuck back into stuff when conference finals begin, assuming that the sites have DFS contests. Otherwise, we're straight into the season in review series, which will kick off probably next week. So tomorrow's show is up in the air depending on what happens in that Spurs-Rockets game. If the Spurs win, that series is done and there'll be no show tomorrow. If the Rockets win, there will be a show. So just giving you some advance notice of what I'm planning on doing with all this moving forward. Now, one thing we mustn't forget is that Mother's Day is coming up. It's this weekend, if I'm correct in my memory. So one way that you can show your appreciation for your mum is by heading to proflowers.com and getting her the 100 Blooms for Mum bouquet. Being a mum is a tough job. I'm not sure. Well, actually, I am sure. I know that very, very few people, if you listen to this podcast, are actually female, and therefore precludes majority of you from being mothers. But the ones who are mums, you know how tough of a job it is. And if not, guys, your wives, your mums, your grandmas, you know how much of an effort they put in to make sure everything is cared for and looked after. So why don't you show your appreciation for your mum? And nothing shows appreciation more than a beautiful bouquet of flowers, which you can get from Pro Flowers. It comes with a free glass vase for just $19.99 plus shipping and handling. And if you want to make a statement, you can upgrade that by getting the premium vase and gourmet chocolates for just $10 more. That's $29.99 plus shipping and handling. That is absolutely nothing for a beautiful gift for your mum for Mother's Day. Get in quickly, choose your delivery date, and Pro Flowers are guaranteed to arrive fresh and beautiful and stay that way for at least 7 days, or you get your money back. The only way to get the 100 Blooms for Mum bouquet with that free glass vase at $19.99 is to visit proflowers.com. Click the microphone in the top right-hand corner and use my code, which is LOFB. That's proflowers.com. Click the microphone and use the code LOFB. This stunning bouquet will sell out quickly. You don't have much time until Mother's Day, so get in, order it, because your time's going to be up pretty quickly. Proflowers.com, code LOFB. All right, let's talk about today's game. Unsurprisingly, another smashing, which has basically been the way that the series or the entirety of the second round of the playoffs have gone, with really only one close game in any series. The Celtics got the big one here over the Wizards, 123-101. It was over, as most of these games have seemed to, or actually the most recent ones have seemed to be, over in the first couple of minutes. The Celtics got off to a hot start, something which they had struggled to do from the majority of this series, with the Wizards having these sustained runs against Boston, but it was the other way around in this game. We'll talk Washington side of things first. Kelly Oubre returned from his Game 4 suspension. He played 20 minutes. He had 13 and 3. But as you'll see with some of these other guys, there was 5 to 6 minutes of garbage time in this game, and Oubre played a lot of that garbage time. So the 20 minutes is a little bit of an overestimation of what his role is on this team moving forward. Johnny Wall was fine, 21 4-4 with a couple of blocks and a couple of threes, while Braddles Beal definitely wasn't the best Bradley on the night. He had 16 2-4 with a steal and a block, and didn't shoot the ball particularly well, just a 37% conversion, and took the most shooting attempts on the team. Markieff Morris also struggled, only the 28 minutes for 9 and 5, while Otto Porter had his third consecutive pretty good game. Didn't shoot the ball from 3 as well as he normally does, but had 13 and 4 in 26 minutes. Bojan Bogdanovic got some extended run as well. He had 23 minutes, 6, 6, and 4 in that extended run. He got those early minutes over Kelly Oubre, which is a little bit different to prior to the suspension that Bojan got that run, but don't expect too much of him moving forward. While Marcin Gortat 7 and 11 in only 25 minutes, while Jan Mahinmi saw 14, and Jason Smith out of the rotation until junk time. So that's something for us to remember when we head into Game 6. On to Boston. Al Horford was tremendous, 19, 6, and 7 with 3 blocks, but he wasn't the best player on the day. That goes, of course, to the other Bradley, Avery Bradley, who was ridiculous. He cooled off a little bit at the end, but still had 29 points, I believe 25 of those in the first half, in only 30 minutes. 4 triples, 6 boards, 3 assists, and he shot 63% and 57% from 3. He really split this game open in the first half, and a huge bounce back from a disappointing Game 4. Marcus Smart, this is as Marcus Smarty as it gets, which is pretty much what I say for him every game. 9 points, but 11 boards, 6 assists, 2 steals, a block, and 2 triples. He doesn't score. He never really will, but he does so many other things for this team. And despite the shot really not working for him at all in the playoffs, he's still getting decent minutes and producing nice contributions. Isaiah had 18, 3, and 9. Didn't need to do a huge amount offensively. Avery Bradley was carrying that load, but he did what he needed to do. Got some shots up, set a lot of screens, which is a weird thing to see him do, but he was good. While Jay Crowder had 18 and 8 in his 26 minutes. They went with Amir Johnson starting once more. He had 18 minutes, 8 and 5 with a block, and he was good. So I've been fairly critical of the way that Brad Stevens has used his starters with Johnson and Green. I've been calling for either Smart, Brown, or Olynyk to be that 5th starter, but it worked out well for Amir Johnson in this game. He was active rebounding. They still got killed rebounding, especially early. But he was a key. They ended up winning the rebound battle at the end, but early on they were getting killed in the rebounds. And Amir was good. He's providing some good options, some good rim defense. He was providing an alley-oop option on occasion. So it did work out, and he did play those 18 minutes. Jaylen Brown, scoreless, but was good. Really good defensive stuff. 3 boards in 26 minutes, while Rozier had 5, 2, and 1 in his 21. Gerald Green didn't see the floor until garbage time again. So assuming they stick with this same lineup, Green won't be in the rotation moving forward for Game 6. Tom Jeezy says he listens every day. He says that the first time catching it live, he sounds different. What sounds different? Do you listen to the podcast on increased speed? Maybe that's the difference. I don't see what's different. Maybe that's it. Maybe you listen on increased speed. And Ron says maybe he edits the sound on the recording. Yeah, I don't edit how my voice sounds. I just eliminate background sounds and try and make it a little bit smoother. But maybe that's the difference. You're hearing the raw, unfiltered version if you're watching the live show there, Tom. Kevin Carlson says, do you think we will see Satoransky next game? We should, but we won't. I don't see it happening. You know that I value Satoransky ahead of Trey Burke. I think that he's a better option than Brandon Jennings, who's been pretty putrid throughout the entirety of this playoffs. And I would be playing Satoransky above both of those guys, but I don't think that Scott Brooks sees it that way. So no, outside of junk time, I don't see Satoransky getting into this rotation really at all, which is a shame because that I do really like Big Thomas. As I said, you can go listen to yesterday's podcast for a full breakdown of the Houston and San Antonio game. I talked about it there, but what I'm going to do now is if we assume in today's show that Kawhi is out, what changes? Who gets the bump? Who gets the boost? And I think that's a decent way to look at it because at the moment, he said he's playing. The Spurs listed him as questionable. It was a bad ankle sprain. They got a game advantage. Lots of talk of maybe they just sit him out, give him the 4 days recovery, get him back for Game 7. It's risky, but who knows how this ankle's actually responding just at this point. Bobby Madry says, are you going to do a show about the draft lottery results? Absolutely, Bobby. That will definitely be happening. So the draft is next Tuesday night. There will be a draft lottery show. You can absolutely guarantee that will happen on Tuesday after that lottery is done. No doubt about it. That will be, whether it's a standalone show, if it's included in something else, it will be there. Don't worry about that, Bobby. All right, let's talk about this Spurs Rockets game, assuming the Kawhi is out, because that is obviously the variable that we're not sure of just at this point. So let's get into that and discuss it. I believe that if Kawhi is out, we're going to see big minutes from Kyle Anderson. Now, he did struggle a little bit in Game 4, but previously during the season, whenever Kawhi goes out, we see more Anderson. What we will also see, we'll see a bump for John Simmons, a significant bump. We'll see a bump for Manu, potentially. I think we'll see more Dan Green, more Pat Mills, and a shitload more LaMarcus Aldridge, which might lead us to a little bit of more two big lineups. So maybe with some extra power, maybe some Dave Lee. I'm not really keen on that. And the other guy I think gains maybe a couple of minutes is Davis Bertans. Those guys I think gain from Kawhi going in. Now Kawhi's probably going to play 40 if he's ready to go. So there's minutes to go around there. Anderson probably gets the majority of that, and Simmons and Green and Mills are the biggest beneficiaries. But at $2,000 on FanDuel and on DraftKings for Kyle Anderson, if you're setting a GPP and you don't know the status of Kawhi Leonard, which you will know before it starts, obviously, it's really hard to go past at 2,000 because 10 points and you're done. That's 5x. But you're talking about the potential for 10, 12, 15x for Kyle Anderson, and that's huge. As for John Simmons, he's at 2,500. Regardless, he's almost a guy that you have to have in a lineup. We saw him play some significant minutes in the last game, and if Kawhi's out, that only helps him. While Manu was sensational as well with some big minutes in Game 5. Not sure he does the exact same thing in Game 6, but at that 2,800 price tag, it is really hard to go past. It does bump, as I said, Mills, Green, and LaMarcus Aldridge. It probably also helps Jim Harden as well, even though Simmons guarded Harden pretty well. Just not having Leonard around will help Harden. It probably helps Trev Ariza as well, who saw Kawhi on him for a significant chunk of time throughout the games when they're both matched up at the 4. So Ariza for Houston, he gets a bump if Kawhi happens to be out. So they're the guys that you should be looking at if Kawhi doesn't go. And I said the rest of the breakdown for that game I spoke about on yesterday's show. Tom throws in, what time is it in Australia? Well, in Australia where I am, which is in Melbourne on the East Coast, it is currently 2 p.m. There you go, Tom. There's your time zone lesson for today. 2 p.m. it currently is here, so smack bang in the middle of the day. Let's now talk about the next game, which is Game 6 between Boston and Washington. We head back to Washington. No team has lost on their home court in this series yet, so Washington's favored by 5.5, which makes sense. The total is 219, so a pretty boisterous total, which helps us for DFS. Not like the other ones low at 213.5, but 219 is the game that you would want to favor. But in saying that, the value really does look to be in the San Antonio-Houston game with guys like Beverly, with guys like Simmons, Ginobili, Mills, Green. A lot of the value plays come from that game, and a lot of the more solidish options come in the Boston-Washington series. So it's not as easy as looking at it and going, oh, there's a higher total, let's stack our Boston-Washingtons, because you're going to get a lot of value out of that San Antonio and Houston game as well. Let's talk point guards. No injuries to be concerned about in this game, so that's always a good sign. Terry Rozier is at 2,500. I think it's fair to say at this point that Rozier is just going to play around 17 to 20 minutes a night. Played 21 today, had 13 points, and at 2,500, I'm really happy with that return. So we've got our expensive point guards. We've got Wall, we've got Isaiah, but remember, there are a lot of other cheap ones around. You've got Millsy, you've got Pat Bev, and you've got Rozier. So while a lot of the time going big at point guard is the way to go, not so sure when you can get some solid value here and then get your load up at shooting guard with Jim Harden, who's a big one there, obviously. And you can go with guys like LaMarcus Aldridge if you're spending up a little bit at power forward, Al Horford, who you want to spend up a little bit at center as well. And if Kawhi is in, you spend up on him too. So you go your Harden, Kawhi, and maybe you go a big price point guard, and then you throw a cheapie in there like Millsy, like Rozier, like Beverly. Speaking of the big point guards, 9,000 for Isaiah Thomas. Hasn't really sniffed that value at all in the last few games, averaging under 27 points in his last 3 in this series. So at $9,000, I'm just not feeling it. On the road, John Wall defense, it has impacting Isaiah, and it's enabled the other players to step up their game, like Braddles, like Al Horford, but that doesn't really help if you're rostering Isaiah Thomas. If I'm spending up, it's Johnny Wall for me, 10,600. Now, he wasn't at his brilliant best in Game 5. He only registered 36 points, but I feel more confident about John Wall breaking through 50 points than I do about Isaiah breaking through 45. So Wall would be the point guard anchor that I would look for on this 2-day slate of games. Brandon Jennings, cool. I don't think we need to worry about that. When you got him and Terry Rozier both coming in at 2,500, it's a no-brainer to me that I take Rozier there. Now, Terry is at 3,700 over on DraftKings, so that isn't as appealing, quite clearly. And Isaiah Thomas at 9.2 and John Wall at 10.8. I still lean Wall a little bit there over Thomas, but Thomas with the scoring system on DraftKings is more appealing over there than what he is over on FanDuel. Tom throws in, he goes, how do you guys watch the games at 2 p.m.? Streaming? What do you mean, how do I watch the games? I watch them on TV. Yes, I've got League Pass, so I watch them there, or ESPN through our cable. The majority of the games are on, the playoff games are on there. So yeah, that's how I watch them, Tom. It is 2 p.m. It is the middle of the day, but that's how we do it. Shooting guards. Avery Bradley, sensational, 42 he dropped today. He's at 5,600. The last time back in Washington, he wasn't that successful. In fact, he had a real stinker and then bounced back. But 5,600 is a very, very cheap price, and I'd be happy to go back there. You can look to the other Bradley, 7,200 for Braddles Beal. Yeah, given the discrepancy in the price there, I'd be more than happy to go back for Avery Bradley. But if I'm sitting around, then I've got Avery Bradley, and then my salary comes back with 2,000 less, I would switch it for Beal. Despite the discrepancy in their play in Game 5, that doesn't mean that it's going to be the same in Game 6. The change in venue, the natural variance in performances. If I've got that extra $1,600, I would swap in Beal for Bradley, assuming I've got that money. If not, Avery Bradley is the one I'd start with, and then I'd see how the rest pans out, and then I'd go, you know what, I've got this money left, let's upgrade. And I think that is an upgrade. Despite how well Bradley played, he won't continue to shoot that well. Nobody can continue. He shot like 70%, Beal shot 35%. Even them back up, and then performances even up. And I think that's probably what you should be looking at and looking to expect. On FanDuel, Avery Bradley's at 6,000, so not quite as appealing, and 79 for Bradley Beal. So the salaries, that 79 for Beal is a disgusting salary. I'm not really interested in that. Really in the slightest. 5,300 for Marcus Smart. Given he is 5,300 as a shooting guard and Beal is 79, I feel more confident about Smart beating that baseline number and being a safer cash play. But if I'm looking for tournaments, it's Beal, because he can go for 40, he can go for 50, whereas Smart I think is just going to knock out at 25 or 27 every game, whereas Beal might get you at 27, but at $8,000, that's shit. You get 27 from Smart at 5,300, it's great. Then that's the difference. So Smart would be the guy I look at as a cash guy, but tournaments, Beal, and to a lesser extent Bradley, they have a higher ceiling over there. At small forward, keep going back to Otto Porter, 5,400. Wasn't at his best today, had 23, but that's not far off where you need to be. That's a really cheap price for Otto. I'm there for that. On DraftKings though, at 6,600, I'm not. That's too high. So I would much rather go with a Jay Crowder at 61 on DraftKings, but on FanDuel, 54 for Otto versus 62 for Jay. It's a pretty simple one of going for Otto Porter, so it is a big difference between the sites. Jaylen Brown saw 26 minutes today, 11 points. Minutes were good, really active defensively. He's at 2,200, but the 2,500 for Rozier is a better spending of that. The 2,500 for John Simmons is better spending. The 2,000 for Kyle Anderson if Kawhi is out is much better spending. So I'm not really into that for Jaylen. Boyan's at 4,000, strictly GPP. I don't really like it for cash. I don't even think he's that high for tournaments, to be honest. While Kelly Oubre at 3,000, I just don't feel him as having a big upside. He was limited today. He didn't do a huge amount. At power forward, Markieff at 5,500. You could say he shit the bed today. He still had 20 points, so it wasn't a complete disaster. I think at 5,500, it's a real solid play and much better to me than taking Amir Johnson. Although, in saying that, in fairness to Amir, at 2,500, and he put up 16 points today, it's a massive, massive win. So if you are struggling for cash, Amir is not a bad option, because I'm almost 100% sure he will start Game 6 and get 14 to 15 minutes. But given the status of Kawhi maybe not being in there, you might not need to skimp at power forward, and saving that $3,000 might not. If it takes you going from, say, Wall down to Isaiah Thomas in order to fit Markeith in, I'm not sure how I'd approach that. It is an interesting I guess exercise to look at how it goes, but most of the time you're not going to have to sacrifice that salary with options like John Simmons around, with Rozier around, with Jan Mihinmi around, who can comfortably get you that value, that 15-point value at $2,000. And skimping at the other positions, like moving down from a Markeith to a Amir, is probably not 100% necessary majority of the time. Markeith's at 58 on DraftKings. I like that as well. I'm happy to go back to that well there. And 26 for Amir on DraftKings makes him less interesting than what he is over on FanDuel. At center, I've talked about Mihinmi already. He is at 2,300. Look, didn't have a great game today. 11 points in 14 minutes, but it's not far off where it needs to be. He gets 14 points, then you've got your value back straight away. And I don't think that's too much of a stretch to think that Mihinmi at home, he can have a 28-pointer. Quite comfortably. He's had these games before in limited minutes, so I love him for a tournament, and I like him for cash as well. But he's not a guy that if he's in my lineup, I have to have Mihinmi, and then sacrifice in other positions and play up money at other areas just because I have to have Mihinmi in there. But he is a good way to start a lineup. As for Marcin Gortat at 5,300, the minutes and the production were a little bit down, but that 5,300 is not a bad salary, so I don't think he's a disgusting play. It's 6,000 on DraftKings. I reckon you can do better than using Gortat over there. At that sort of a price tag, it isn't super appealing to me at that sort of a salary. The other name we look at, of course, is Big Bad Al Horford. He is at 8,100 on FanDuel. Exceeded that today with 42 points. I just don't think that that's the best bet. 7,100 on DraftKings. I'm there for that. I think that's a really good use of that money over on DraftKings. The $1,000 difference, the 3-point bonus that he gets, the way that he's been playing, his points are scoring at a much bigger rate over on DraftKings, where he averages 3 points more per game over the last 5, and that reduced salary makes him a better option over there on that site. Tom just smashing it with the questions today. Always happy to answer them before we transition into the next segment. How long have I been doing podcasts? Well, that's a good question. This is my 893rd episode, and it started in February 2014. So we're talking 3 and a bit years. So yeah, 3 and a bit years, 892 episodes down. We'll crack the 1,000 before next season starts. I think we should have 100 episodes between now and middle of October. Pretty sure we will. So we'll crack that 1,000 mark at some point before we head into the 2017-18 NBA season. So what I'll do now is look at the entirety of this 2-game slate and point out some guys that I think on both sides might be considered core players. If we start with FanDuel, it's real hard to go past John Simmons. 2,500 for him is a super price, and the other way you can go is 2,800 for Manu. They're really, really solid options. If you want to spend up a little bit, you look at Mills and Beverly, who are also strong options. 4,600 for Pat Mills and 5,500 for Pat Beverly, and then you got 2,500 for Terry Rozier. So they're a nice bunch of cheap options over on FanDuel. Looking at more expensive guys in that mid-price, Markeith at 55 I really like, Otto Porter at 54 I really like, and it's hard to me, with the abundance of cheap options, you put those guys in and you get Jim Harden in there at 12.4, which he might not reach 5x, but given the value of the other guys you've got around, love that, and then 10.6 for Johnny Wall. I can see having a Wall, Harden, Rozier, Simmons as a really strong core to start off a lineup, and then you could even throw in a Gortat at 5,300 despite his reduced role. You can look at a Clint Capella at 65. He might make sense given the structure of the rest of that lineup. But I think that looking at those cheap Spurs, Simmons, Mills, Ginobili, and the expensive guys Harden and Wall, that's the direction I'd be looking at on FanDuel in trying to set up a lineup over there. On DraftKings, it's a little bit different. I really like Pat Bev over there. He's one of the guys I would start to look at in a core cash lineup. 5,100 is ludicrously cheap. Manu's at 3,300. I think that's a bit more risky because he has been up and down in the playoffs. But Beverly and Harden at 5-1 and 10-9, 16,000 for those two guys when you should feel pretty good about getting 90 points. I think getting 90 points out of those two for 1,600 is a pretty decent return. I think you'd be pretty happy with that result. So they are core guys. 53 for Pat Mills is really hard to go past as well, as is 6,100 for Clint Capella. I think they are a bunch of strong options. Also, if Kawhi is out, there's 6,900.
Giggity.
Misplaced it. The 6,900 for LaMarcus Aldridge on DraftKings, if Kawhi is out, is a strong option at power forward there. Also, and I'd also look at Dan Green at 4,300, assuming Kawhi is out. And of course, we throw Kyle Anderson into that mix at 2,000, and he can become that real cheap option, especially on DraftKings. On FanDuel, it comes down to him and John Simmons as to which one of those you want. But on given the price of Simmons on DraftKings, I think Kyle Anderson jumps up and becomes a better option. I also like Beal and both the Bradleys, Bradley Beal, Avery Bradley, and Al Horford over on DraftKings with their scoring as well. And Trevor Ariza, if Kawhi is out, 5,600 for Trev is a pretty strong price. Kevin Carlson, do you think the Wiz Celtics series will go to 7? Yes, that is what I think that's what I predicted at the start. I predicted Wizards in 7, I believe. So yes, I am sticking with my, even if I didn't pick Wizards in 7, I picked the Wizards. So I am sticking with my Wizards pick. And in order for them to win, the series has to go 7. So yes, Kevin, that is the way I'm going. And Tom throws in one last question before we're ready to sign off. Will The Undertaker play tomorrow? Only if it's a blowout. That is the way that Popovich is going. I disagree with it. You know I disagree with it. But no, I don't think we see Dwayne Dedman in the game unless it is a 20-point margin in either direction. We're done. Covered a fair bit in today's show. Reminder, tomorrow's show, who knows if it's going to go ahead. If the Spurs win, it won't. If the Spurs lose, it will, because then we will have 2 more games to cover in this round and another 2-day contest to look at. But otherwise, we will not be having a podcast tomorrow. But the podcast will still be running after that. Don't worry. Next week, we'll be starting the season in review shows. We'll be having the conference finals start. So depending on how that works for DFS, there'll be some shows there as well. A draft lottery recap also, and some other things that I've got planned, which will happen over the coming weeks. If you want to check out something with some evergreen content, a couple of days ago, myself and Kyle and Greg from Basketball Monster, we redrafted the 2016 NBA draft. Go and have a listen, go and argue, go and yell at yourself when you hear how bad you think some of our picks are. But we redrafted the first round of the 2016 draft. I was pretty happy with my selections, but plenty of you will disagree with them. I've got no doubt about that. Share that with your friends and, hey, tell them how much of a dick I am for making whatever pick you think was bad for your team. I'm down with that. Actually, one last thing. I tweeted it out just before we went to air. I don't remember what Twitter account had it, but it had a picture of 5 blokes on it. It said, how many of these guys do you think will be Hall of Famers? So the 5 guys on there were Chris Paul, it was Chris Bosh, it was Carmelo Anthony, it was Dwight Howard, and it was Rajon Rondo. They were the 5 guys. And how many do you think will be Hall of Famers? If you go and read the replies to that on Twitter, there's some ludicrous comments, as I've said before. The answer to me is a clear 4. Rondo is not a Hall of Famer. Chris Paul is an absolute 100% lock. Melo is a lock. Chris Bosh is 100% a lock, as is Dwight Howard. Those 4 to me, I cannot see any argument against those guys getting into the Hall of Fame. Rondo, cool, no worries. That's not happening. 4 out of the 5 guys should be Hall of Famers, but lots of differing opinions, even amongst the replies. When I quote tweeted it today, people saying he's 1, 2, 3, and having Rondo in and Howard out, or not sure about Bosh. To me, those 4 are absolute dead certainties, and Rondo is not going to make it. But that's my take. Let me know what you think. We are done here, guys. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Kelly Olynyk.